afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the second half of the International AI Summit brought to you by Forum Europe and, of course, Euronews. For those of us just joining online, perhaps just waking up over in the US, my name is Maeve McMahon, and I'm delighted to be here with you today for what is a very timely event. We've had an intense morning of fascinating discussions. Just before lunch, the talk on China was very rich in content. Unfortunately, it was only 20 minutes, but we have now an action-packed afternoon as well. A fantastic lineup for you that Andrea, who will join me now up on stage, will be moderating. He'll be speaking now in just a minute to Ruman Chowdhury, the well-known data scientist who is already connected and looking forward to speaking to us. So Andrea, I will pass it over to you. Really excited about this section.
Thank you very much, Maeve. Let me see, I see. Oh, Ruman, here you are. I see you on screen. I know that you're super busy traveling, like many of us. It's an interesting period for people that work in the AI space, right? I also had to sneak out at this conference this morning to give a speech connected to the OECD ministerial, then come back here, moderate conferences, and then another panel, and so on and so forth. So, Ruman, let me get into the action immediately. Ruman is a very well-known data scientist. It's difficult to define you. I have perhaps 3 adjectives for you that are my ones. And you know that I mean it because this is something that I told you even when you were much earlier in your career, which is Ruman is extremely competent, extremely brilliant and smart, but she is also exposed, meaning she doesn't shy away from having opinions. And that's what I really always liked about her. Because, of course, it's easy to be polite and diplomatic everywhere you go. You know, you don't make enemies and so on. But first of all, Ruman, you have been in the trenches, right, in the front lines of many battles, so many activities. I remember, maybe we get back to this in a few minutes, when you were at Twitter, head of a research team that actually was called Meta. So, I mean, you've seen it all, right? And when you were doing this, actually, you had to really dirty your hands with what does it mean to moderate content, right, algorithmically. Before then, you developed frameworks for auditing AI systems when you were at Accenture, when you founded Parity. Then you ended up in the board of the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation in the UK. Your activity as really, you ended up being one of the only non-industry experts in Chuck Schumer's seminars and meetings on AI in the context of the US Congress. So you have a very broad experience in this field. And you've seen many of these initiatives when they were at the very beginning, at the outset, right? So my first question to you would be, apart from saying thanks for being with us, what do you make of all this proliferation of initiatives, right? Cam Carey this morning said, if this were a movie, it would be everything, everywhere, all at once, meaning everything is happening at the same time. What do you think is happening really in the AI governance world?
Well, I think for years. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and that's true, Andrea. I feel like we are old war veterans, and we've gone back many years in this field. I think I've seen the term going on where people are saying this is the World Cup of AI, where every country is now in competition to see who can make the best AI safety institute and have the most governance, et cetera. And in one sense, I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to see there being serious attention being paid by government. I'm happy to see a lot of investment in building out technical skill, especially technical third-party skill, which is what I'm focused on now, is the field of independent algorithmic auditors and independent tech assessors, so you don't have to work at a company to be able to understand what's happening inside ML and AI algorithms and how they impact society. But I do worry. I worry a little bit that things are rushing forward very, very quickly. I do worry a little bit about government overreach sometimes. I think maybe the pendulum has swung from one side where we were thinking, oh, industry has all the knowledge, industry has all the skill and ability, et cetera, all the way to the other side where people are rushing to build laws, regulations, legislation in a field such as algorithmic auditing, AI monitoring and testing, which is from even a research perspective, a technical perspective, still very new.
Yeah, thank you, Roman. Do you think there's since I know that you would like to express your opinions, and so I invite you to do so. Is there anyone who's getting it right more than others? Is there a process that you think is more promising than others?
Um, I think a lot of people have very good perspectives in how they're tackling the problem. So what I like about the UK approach so far, and in transparency, I've actually agreed to advise the UK AI Safety Institute as a technical lead for societal impacts, is they're taking a very programmatic, almost like model monitoring and assessment kind of approach, which is one that, of course, I've always been in favor of. I like that the United States, however, has taken a very strong perspective on protecting civil rights, as well as understanding impact on society. I also like that there's been more conversation, especially out of the EU, coming about impact on democracy and democratic processes. So I like some of the stuff I'm seeing in the DSA as well. So, Article 34, which, talks very specifically about things that you would not normally consider to be the purview of an external auditor, such as impact on human rights and violations of human rights. As I mentioned, impact on democracy and democratic processes, et cetera. So I don't know if any one group is getting it right, but I think we are seeing a lot of very smart movement. The other thing I'll add is um, just about every entity that I'm seeing that is successful understands that no one party can do it alone. This is not just a purview of lawyers or just the purview of technologists and data scientists or, just the purview of academics and researchers. It is actually a joint and collaborative effort. My prediction is the most successful outcomes will be the ones that truly integrate the wide range of skill sets that exist in each of these different fields and their approach to responsible AI.
Thank you. In the global debate on AI governance, I mean, there has been a lot of emphasis lately on the notion of safety, right? Do you think that it is a bit excessive, or are you among those that believe that one of the key risks that we need to identify now and act upon at this stage is the risk that AI ends up replacing us as humans, so leading to the extinction of the human race? Because many of us were a bit puzzled when Ursula von der Leyen gave the State of the Union speech this year, right? She didn't mention much, for example, cohesion or the future of the single market, although she mentioned that, but she certainly mentioned the extinction of the human race. So they say, okay, is this something that is becoming even more important at this stage or more salient than some of the typical things that the EU does? What do you think?
In short, no. I think human beings will do a good enough job of making the human race extinct before an AI or any sort of algorithmic system does. And if it is mediated via an AI system, it is because a human being built it and a human being deployed it. So to be very clear, we are in no way in a world in which an AI system unilaterally can take action of itself. Without a human being giving it some sort of guidance, and also the capabilities in order to have a system of that level of sophistication would have to be built by human beings. So this is not, even if that is a concern, it is not a concern I share, but even if that is a concern, what we should then be thinking about is who are the human beings building this technology, right? And who are the human beings that will be implementing this technology? There is one aspect to that field of thinking that I do agree with, and they call it over-reliance. And I do agree with this assessment. So, it is not that an AI system will come alive, crawl out of a computer, and decide to kill us all. This is not the plot of Terminator. What can and might happen, and actually, as Vice President Kamala Harris pointed out, it is an existential risk when somebody is denied a kidney transplant because of a history of bias and discrimination against people of color that leads to algorithms misallocating what a critical patient is. That has happened in the United States. It is an existential risk when someone is denied their public pension benefits because an algorithm mistakenly believes that all immigrants are people who are causing fraud, which has happened, right? So these are existential risks because they are literally costing people their lives and their livelihood today. What I do not want to worry about or do not think we should spend a lot of time on is thinking about AI as this technology that is alive and that is going to make decisions on its own. It will not. Human beings will always be making the decisions.
Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified this because I totally share this view, right? But it has become a very widely expressed view, and this alarmism or long-termism, and to some extent, the famous TESCREAL bundle, and the various movements that bring in a lot of fear of future threats and existential risks for AI, without mentioning that indeed there are many other ways in which we can kill ourselves in the future, and we're doing pretty well there, right? Perhaps on the
We're
AI
doing
side
a
is the
good
one
job
where
of
we're doing the worst. Now, I want to get a little bit more
exactly.
into the details of your past career, because I think it's very relevant for what is happening now. And so, bring you back to when you were working at Twitter. And I remember one thing. I don't know how many people remember that Ruman was heading a research team. And then correct me if I don't remember it properly. But you were heading a research team that at some point decided, as a responsible act inside a corporation, to test whether your algorithms for content moderation were amplifying more specific type of speech as opposed to others, right? And I remember a paper in which you ended up with your team concluding that your algorithm was amplifying a little bit more the sort of the right-wing conservative type of narrative as opposed to the more progressive one. But this is not because you want it, it's just because you need to check, is how a company has to identify, measure, and treat risks internally. What do you think? Have we progressed on content moderation and algorithmic content moderation? Is this, we will ask you later whether you think Twitter/X has progressed, but in general, do you think it is something where we're making a lot of good progress? Because mis and disinformation are currently considered like the #1 risk by many in many international forums when talking about AI today. So what do you think? Is there something more that we can do in that respect?
Yeah, so the team I led at Twitter, as you mentioned, was the machine learning, ethics, transparency, and accountability team, Team Meta. We always say that we had the name first. Actually, the team was started in
Absolutely.
2019 by Luca Belli and Nazir Khan. I came on board in early 2021, so late 2020 roughly. The team was actually an applied research and engineering team. So we sat within the core ML AI team called Cortex. So my counterparts, the other engineering directors, were people who built our machine learning features, helped provide services for the other parts of Twitter that were making ML and AI models. And that, to me, was a very smart and natural place where responsible AI should fit in, right? We're not, a policy function. We weren't a pure research function, but we actually need to exist in, core product in application. So the research you're referring to, we looked at our recommendation system and how it compared to a reverse chronological timeline to determine whether or not there was algorithmic amplification of certain political content. And to your point, in 7 out of 8 Western democracies, the only country we didn't see it was in Germany. There was a algorithmic preference and amplification of center-right content. So this isn't extreme right content and center-right content. But the interesting thing to discuss, and certainly something that's very related to this era of generative AI, is, so first of all, is this algorithmic bias? And what I wrote in our blog post is that we don't know, because the purpose of algorithms is to amplify the kind of content that it thinks we want to see. And those signals are picked up by the media we're looking at, what we like, what we repost, who we follow. And during the time of that analysis, which was April to August of 2020, certainly we were all talking about center-right content. This is right before the US presidential election. There were similar elections happening in Hungary and other places around the world. So the fundamental question is, should we even have algorithms? Because what if, and again, we did not get to complete our analysis of why this was occurring because Elon Musk took over, et cetera. But what if it was not bias? Because in this case, bias means a very specific thing, is that the model is not performing as it should be. What if the model is performing as expected, and what it is serving us is the kind of content that we've been engaging with, which is center-right content? Now, that's an interesting question, more of almost like a philosophical question and a question of governance and leadership. Who gets to decide that decision? Who gets to make that decision? Who gets to decide what is right or wrong? So in terms of content moderation, with the upcoming elections in 2024, I am concerned. I think people are very rightly concerned about mis and disinformation on platforms for many reasons. Number one is that Twitter is not the same company that it was before. Second is that now we're in a world of generative AI. And a lot of folks, myself included, have demonstrated ways in which mis and disinformation cannot just be created, but also be amplified. So to be clear, people have always made bad content. That's not a new thing. What is actually new at net is that a lot of this content, it'll be much, much easier for malicious actors to design campaigns for amplification and dissemination using generative AI.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roman. And I remember Anu Bradford told me the other day, how many countries are going to have elections next year? 65 or something like this, right? So if that is a problem that we don't know how to address properly, that's going to be a big. Of course, some of these elections are absolutely even more important for the impact that they can have in geopolitical terms. Now, Ruman, as we have only a few minutes left in our conversation, I want to bring you now to Brussels, virtually, of course, but to the EU side, and ask you what's your opinion of the ongoing developments in the EU AI Act, and more specifically, you've been advising the Center for the GRC in the creation of the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency. So I'd like to know, what are your hopes for this? How do you see this playing a role at the European and global level in algorithmic auditing, for example?
Yeah, so I'm very optimistic about what I've seen in the DSA, and I hope that the EU AI Act embodies the same amount of transparency for third-party and external assessors, establishes clear guidelines on what an audit should look like. Currently, I know it is more of the language of a conformance assessment. My encouragement is that it should be a bit broader than simply conformance to product specifications. We should be looking more broadly at impact on society, which often is not captured in that framework. But I do hope that there is specific support for an independent community. There are guidelines around what auditing should look like. My big concern is that we will pass a lot of laws around that mandate algorithmic auditing with zero guidance on what algorithmic auditing should be or what is the standard for an audit. This is what we've seen in some other instances. But I'm optimistic actually about essentially the role that the EU can play in helping set a global agenda. So right now, what we're seeing is a proliferation of AI safety institutes, right? The UK has announced theirs, the US has announced theirs within NIST. My understanding is there's going to be another one set up in Paris and Montreal. So we will now have this global network of safety institutes, all of which will be basically newborn and thinking about what to do. I hope that there can be a prioritized agenda set specifically about what should a global entity be addressing, or a global network of safety institutes, and how that is different from what should be handled on a national level or a local level.
All right, that's a very interesting and concrete policy proposal. We will have in a few minutes Dragos Tudorake with us. I mean, the European Parliament, but Dragos will correct me if I'm wrong, has been working a lot to expand a little bit the notion of impact and harm, to go into the broader societal and even environmental impacts compared to the original European Commission proposal, which made me happy because in the high-level expert group on AI, of which I was a member, we had pointed at trustworthy AI to have also an orientation towards societal and environmental well-being. So we are at the end of our conversation, Ruman, and I want to thank you for the great inputs that you've given us. But I have one last question, which is a very general one, which is, I'm going to give you a magic wand, and give you the possibility of choosing one thing that we can get right and do at the global level to get global AI governance right. Is there anything that you would do that is currently not being done?
Interoperability. I worry that we will have a proliferation of different standards, different methodologies, and different benchmarks, which will actually make governance much harder. One thing I would push for is for people to collaborate and create systems that are interoperable.
And Roman, is there a way for interoperable frameworks to also be good? Or you think we will go through a race to the bottom? How to avoid that?
No, I think it certainly is possible for interoperable frameworks to be good. And frankly, I think better governance will happen that way. When people say regulation stifles innovation, when that belief is shared, I think one of the things people are thinking about and are concerned about is the fact that it becomes onerously difficult to be in compliance across 15, 20, 30, 100 different jurisdictions. So frankly, interoperability, if we truly are to actually enable progress in building good technology, it is a necessary cornerstone in building good policy.
Thank you very much, Roman. I will ask the audience to give you a big applause. You will hear it from wherever you are. I wish you safe travels, and please let us know when you come to Brussels, and we'll be happy to host you here for an exciting conversation. So thanks again, and we will move on to our panel now. They will be very related to what Roman told us, which is on the AI Act. So we'll call on stage our panelists. Juha Eikilä, the advisor at the European Commission inside DG Connect on artificial intelligence. Dragos Tudorake, member of the European Parliament, lead rapporteur for the AI Act, well known to many of you. Professor Anu Bradford, professor of law and international organization at Columbia Law School. And then we have Jean-Marc Leclerc, director. We have two directors of EU and government affairs. So Jean-Marc, director of EU affairs, government and regulation at IBM, and Corinna Schulze at SAP, director of EU government affairs. Right, so you've heard Roman. Hopefully it was an interesting interview. I mean, what she said. No, my questions were, I did what I can. I'm not a good journalist such as Maeve, but I did whatever I could. But so the AI Act has been, lingering on our conversation the whole day, right? And not only the whole day, the whole week, the whole month, and the whole past few years, right? Dragos, I don't know, you cannot tell us, but maybe you wake up in the middle of the night and say, okay, when is this going to be over? Because this has basically been your main occupation for the past years, right? So I'll start with Juha. I want to bring you back to the original proposal of the European Commission, right? And we have gone a little bit further away from that original proposal. The leaks and the articles that we see also show different directions in which the text of the AI Act is going on its way to finalization. So my question is not going to be a very diplomatic one, but very direct, is the AI Act already old?
Old in the sense of the time that has passed, depends on how you think of 2.5 years, whether it's old or not. It's the necessary time we have to achieve the final outcome of it, of course. If you mean old in the sense of outdated, no, I don't think so, of course, because obviously the process and the time that has elapsed has also given us the opportunity to review things, and the Parliament and the Council positions also reflect that. Of course, things have developed in the meantime. 2.5 years ago, even the AI landscape looked different, as we all know. But of course, we are able to respond to that, and so those who are negotiating the final outcome are responding to it and taking into account the developments that have intervened in the meantime. So I don't think that's the case. And of course, I have now yesterday, already today, some people have asked me, okay, so what about all the other initiatives? You may want to come back to this later. But I mean, they don't take anything away from us. We have, of course, this long-standing commitment to international cooperation, and we have stated it openly. It's documented that we advocate the responsible governance of AI, also internationally, and we want to work together with those who want to develop guardrails on AI. So we actually do see that a lot of things are going in the same direction that we outlined already. Actually, not just 2.5 years ago. That was, in a way, the culmination point. You mentioned the high-level expert group. That was set up in 2018, soon after our first AI strategy, comprehensive strategy, was published in April 2018. So we've been working on this very, very long. We are there for the long haul, and the comprehensive strategy has been shaped then and gradually elaborated and developed further.
Yeah, thank you very much, Juha. And indeed, this is a debate that has started a little bit in a shocking way, in my opinion, in the European Parliament in the first resolution on civil law rules for robotics. And I don't know what Dragos thinks about that resolution. What I remember is that he was proposing to give legal personality to smart autonomous robots. So the scientific community sort of stood up and said, well, wait a second, what are we going to do? They are coming, and remember that resolution had Frankenstein, the Prague's Golem, and the three laws of robotics of Isaac Asimov, all in the first page, basically. And so, for me, it's a very important observation that EU institutions throughout the years have demonstrated that they can be a learning system, just like some AI systems that we are trying to regulate, right? And there's been a lot of technical knowledge flowing through the high-level expert group, the AI Alliance, from the white paper, through the consultation, the impact assessment of the AI Act, and then the work of the Parliament. So I've had the luck to be involved in some of these conversations, and it's been a very interesting process. But at the same time, it starts giving a little bit, an opportunity to criticize to the people that say that typically, since it takes so long to regulate in Brussels, EU institutions try to start a bit too soon because they know it's going to take time, and they normally finish too late. Okay, so is this the case, Dragos? What do you think?
Well, I'm certainly not the one to judge because I'm too much in the process and I'm inevitably subjective. But I don't think that we are taking too long because what we're doing is also fundamentally different than everything else that goes on. It's one thing to agree on principles, and let's not forget the EU has already done that a long time ago. You mentioned the high-level expert group. And it's, again, it's much easier to agree on voluntary commitments, on frameworks that are looser and governances that are looser, and it's a completely different exercise to write hard law. And we are the only ones right now that we are that advanced in actually writing hard law. And I think, as everyone agrees, it is better to take your time and produce quality than to actually speed up and miss some important objectives that you have. And also, as was rightly mentioned, this has been, to a certain extent, also a bit of a moving target. Many things have happened as we were in the middle of things. Let's not ignore one of the big topics that is also part of the global conversation, and certainly now part of the EU AI Act negotiation, which is how do you deal with foundation models. At the time when the Commission put up the proposal, there weren't many experts even that were saying you have to look at foundation models, you have to go into writing rules about that. So again, with all of the complexity of this moving target, of this evolving environment, with all of the complexity of the task at hand of regulating AI, I think we've done a fairly good job in keeping to a decent, reasonable calendar. We are now at a phase where, by the end of the year, I am relatively confident that we'll finish the negotiations, which will still make us, not that this is a race, because it's not. I know that many try to make this a race, it's not, but we are going to be the first jurisdiction that puts on the table, that adopts a set of comprehensive horizontal legislation on AI, and this is not a small thing.
Thank you, Dragos. And before I turn to Anu, just wanted to ask you and perhaps Juha a question, because we had a panel before lunch on standards, right? Because one key part of the AI Act is this standardization process. Perhaps we'll ask also Jean-Marc and Corina later. The mandate for standardization will follow. How long do you think it's going to take? So when we will see, once the text is finalized, the rules really enter into force with the standards backing them, and thereby also perhaps making the life of smaller companies easier and really producing the big impact that the AI Act is supposed to have. Dragos, I don't know if you have expectations or...
Well, I have more than expectation. For me, there is no choice in the matter. We are giving a lot of mandates throughout the text. For the Commission to do guidelines, for the Commission to do certain templates, for standard-setting bodies to write standards. For me, whatever period of time we'll end up negotiating in terms of implementation. Right now, the Commission has proposed 2 years. We will see exactly where we'll set the cursor, but certainly it's going to be something between 1 and 2 years. Well, that time has to be used, has to be used. Again, it's not an expectation, it's not a wishful thinking. I cannot see a world where the legislation comes into effect, and we have no guidelines, we have no templates, we have none of the mandates fulfilled that we are giving now in the text. So yes, it's going to be phase 2 of the hard work that we've already done once the text gets adopted. Phase 2, where we will have to prepare the implementation, we'll have to prepare the enforcement. Not only companies having to prepare compliance, but also, and I would say even more importantly, not that I'm downplaying the importance of companies and the work they will have to do to ensure compliance, but I think getting the enforcement right is going to be the key to the success of this legislation. Not how beautiful it's going to look on paper, but how we are setting the governance right, how we are putting the tools in place, so that the moment it kicks in, then it can actually be played out as we all envisaged it to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dragos. Juha, you want to add something
Just
there?
one short detail. So the standardization work has already started. So the mandate was sent earlier this year, and the standardization organizations are working on it already.
Yeah. Thank you. So enforcement was just mentioned, and in Anu's recent book on the digital empires, you have flagged 2 things. First, that the AI Act might trigger a similar Brussels effect as GDPR did in the past. And second, that the key is going to be enforcement, the ability to show that these rules can actually be enforced and implemented and enforced on the ground. We had also already a question this morning during one of the earlier panels about the Brussels effect. I don't know if the participant's still online and whether he or she knew that Anu will be on the panel later, but Maeve correctly said, okay, we're going to have deep authority on this that is going to give us an answer. So I turn this question to you, Anu. Do you think the AI Act has what it takes to really become a model for the rest of the world, or has it already to some extent become a model?
So I would say that in many ways we already see the AI Act generate the Brussels effect, because there's 2 types of Brussels effects that we generally talk about. So one is the de facto Brussels effect, whereby global companies, when they comply with European regulations, decide that it is in their business interest to extend that compliance across their global development of AI models or their global conduct. So that is when the market forces are generating a response that is global, even in the absence of foreign regulators following the EU's template. So I think that is one way we can see potentially a Brussels effect take place, and that we don't know yet. But I think there's certain logic which suggests that at least across some applications, some AI system, we might indeed see this logic extended. And I think the reason is the following, is that generally the AI systems perform better when they can utilize a lot of data. And then if you want to develop an AI system for the EU market, you do need to obey the obligations embedded in the AI Act. If you then want to utilize and offer the same AI system in other parts of the world, but evade the European regulations, you would need to retrain your models. And often that is not in the interest of the developers. You don't want to throw out the data that you used in the EU, and it is not necessarily efficient. You want to benefit from scale economies. You want to use all the data so that you have best performing models. So that might give you an incentive then to extend your compliance outside as well. But I think there's also another reason, which is that the expectations around the world are also changing. So today, you are much more likely to suffer a reputational cost if you then tell that, look, I am going to be all out making sure that my products are safe in the EU, they protect privacy and other fundamental rights, but I am choosing not to make the same safety adjustments, the same compliance functions that I have chosen to offer in the EU. So I think that's a harder conversation to be had, because there is now a lot of attention on how these companies are actually building their models. So I think there will be also reputational pressure. But where I started is that we already see potentially the Brussels effect, which is the de jure Brussels effect, the kind of influence that the EU has in providing a template for foreign legislators and regulators. And the EU indeed started this conversation much, much earlier. And now we see the others follow suit. And I am not saying it is only because the EU decided to move ahead, but the EU was leading the world towards a conversation whereby the governments around the world realize that either the EU will be setting the standards alone, regulating all our companies, or we actually get into that, whether you call it a race, whether you call it a game, whether we join the effort in drafting these rules as well. So I would say that the executive order that was issued by President Biden recently is in part a reflection to growing domestic pressures, but also to regulatory developments elsewhere, including in the EU. So in that sense, the EU has already set the different tone and shaped the expectations and conversations among the governments. And I think that is significant, and I couldn't agree more with what you have said. I think that is absolutely right, what the EU wants to see. So the EU does not want to and need to be a unilateral regulator. It is a big effort to try to single-handedly sort of hold the AI development across the world to the standards that the EU is endorsing. And especially if you look at these other jurisdictions like the US, endorse a very similar rights-driven view on when it comes to applications of AI. So in that sense, I think the EU can be very content with what it's seeing around the world and take some credit.
And take some credit. And I think perhaps it should do it even a bit more often, to take some credit, because it has kick-started a conversation that then permeated many developments around the world. There are some cases in which this is almost explicit and clear. If you take the Brazilian legislation on AI, that does two things. First, echoes the AI Act very clearly and almost entirely. Second, it does one thing, and I think if Dragos, hopefully you don't think about this at night, but if Dragos could perhaps have the magic wand that I gave Roman before, he would probably do the same thing that Brazil has done, based on some of your past comments, which is they've integrated the liability component, which has been at the EU level subject to a separate proposal that I think now will be lost through the tracks, and perhaps it will be the responsibility of the next European Parliament. But it's a very important complement to what is otherwise a risk-based legislation, and so which leaves most of the other parts of and developments in AI not subject to regulation, and it covers, let's say, the tort component, so the responsibility related to damages caused by AI, by tweaking also the traditional tort law system at the EU level. So thank you, Anu, for this. We're going to get back. I'm sure you're going to get tons of questions about what you just said, and the same applies to you and Dragos. I want to move to this side now, because you might also have views on what Anu just said about compliance, also what Juha and Dragos said. This morning, Jean-Marc, we had quite a lot of comments during the panels about over-regulation, about the need to understand much better the risks before we regulate it. With the metaphor of the seatbelt has been so frequent that I think this could be called now International Seatbelt Summit by now. So is there a concern related to the AI Act among industry players, large corporations such as IBM? What do you think? Is this the AI Act as we know it at the moment, in its current form, striking a good balance between the opportunities and the risks? What do you think?
Well, as you know, the AI Act is first and foremost a product safety and fundamental rights piece of legislation. So its primary role is more to protect rather than support innovation, let's say. It doesn't mean, however, that it should be an obstacle to innovation, right?
It doesn't mean to be.
Exactly. And you know, in the past 2 years, even the most fierce critics of the AI Act have at least recognized one great advantage of it, which is its risk-based, technology-neutral approach. I think you read any paper and you look at any conference on the AI Act, you will hear this. And I couldn't agree more with the idea that you'd regulate the uses of AI according to their level of risk and not the mathematics of AI, right? Because they recommend their system that tells you where is the best restaurant in your area. That's not the same use as something that is an AI system that controls a nuclear plant, right? Different uses, different risks. So this is great. What I'm concerned about, to go to your question, is a possible deviation from this risk-based approach at the moment. I'm sure you've had a lot of discussions on the hot issue of foundation models. I am concerned by what I see at the moment that's being proposed, because it does deviate from that risk-based approach, technologically neutral approach. We are going further into regulating the mathematics of AI rather than the users, because it is impossible to foresee future uses of foundation models or general purpose AI, which is also put in the same basket, which is extremely confusing. Also, you see definitions flying around with what is a high impact model.
Very capable, high impact.
Very capable. And I have the impression at the moment we're looking at certain metrics like computing power. On any of those, I don't see a clear link between risk and that kind of metric. It's not because a system's been trained with high compute power that it will lead to risky users. So these are not adequate metrics to use. So that's a concern that we have at the moment. But not saying that around the question of foundation models that there aren't issues to discuss. To me, the one really serious one is inside the value chain. In case of high-risk AI, high-risk users, does the deployer have all the information needed to comply possibly with the AI Act? So if the AI Act can focus on this point, exchange of information within the value chain among people who have the information at their stage in the value chain, I think that's really important. And to finish maybe on a point related to what Anu was saying, another worry that I have is that the more you will regulate certain elements of an AI system, especially if you base them on some of those metrics, the risk is that you're going to create a little circle, a little group of companies that will have the means to manage all of this, comply with all of this. They'll have a regulatory moat. Antitrust lawyers are familiar with this expression. Yep. And the competition to get in will be very difficult. And for a company like IBM, which is betting on open ecosystems, this could be a huge problem. So there's a competition element to this, which I hope the negotiators will consider as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jean-Marc. This is bringing a lot of elements in the conversation, and I will get back. I'm sure Dragos and Juha will have something to say about this. One element also related to what Anu has written about the EU empire, of the digital empires, is the relevance of competition policy going forward, and the importance of getting it right along the value chain of AI, right? So avoiding that, for example, you place all the responsibility on players that will not necessarily have all the information about the model object, and they will still need to do conformity assessment, or vice versa, asking the players, entities that are very upstream in the process, to foresee all the potential future uses in a way that becomes a superhuman, certainly not even AI powered experience and exercise. So that is something that is quite important. In principle, one would say that in the AI Act, placing the responsibility of the provider would be good if, in a very competitive environment upstream, contractual relations between upstream and downstream player could solve the issue. Meaning, we put it in the contract. I think IBM does it all the time. You call them building blocks, right? Yep. If I remember correctly, yep. You pass on this information and all the related additional technical documentation to the ones that will deploy a specific model for a specific use. And so when this happens contractually, I see, for example, Japan has given interesting guidance on contracts related to AI. This would not perhaps necessitate additional regulation. But in a very concentrated market, and we heard some complaints about this morning, in which there seems to be limited transparency in passing on the information, and so limited incentive upstream to really make that information available, perhaps something needs to be done. So try to be as impartial as possible. But it's true that we are, and that's another thing that I want to put on Dragos and Juha's table. They will not like me for this. Is one thing that we can ask ourselves more generally about the EU policy process, and it is a general question for later, for them, it is, there has been a lot of evidence-based policy making and expert-led conversations in the making of the AI Act. Can we say the same thing about the trilogue? Meaning there are many things that are changing currently that require a lot of technical input, for example, on computational power and so on. And of course, reopening Pandora's box again is a problem, but is it, say, healthy in the final part of the policy process to bring in so many different elements? And so I move to Corinna to ask her a little bit about this, because we've seen lately in the past few weeks more variants of the AI Act that we've seen of the coronavirus, let's say, during the pandemic, right? So every week we get a new leak variant and so on and so forth. What do you make of the balance that it's striking? And second, do you think in its structure, since you have been over the past years dealing with GDPR quite a lot, do you think it can produce the effects, the Brussels effect, as Anu was commenting upon it, and even the two types that she illustrated before?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll start with the first question, so I can also piggyback a little bit on what Jean-Marc said. I would like to also emphasize that we see it in a very similar way, and we would not like to see the whole debate being portrayed also US versus EU, right? We heard this morning that, most of the players are US players, the big players. We think we should look beyond and really keep the whole competitiveness in mind. So as a European company, we don't appreciate to portray the debate that way. Let's throw just certain players under the bus and the rest will be fine. We don't think that for the arguments that Jean-Marc presented already, that this is a very quick moving target, and I would totally agree with you that right now we don't see the same kind of scrutiny in the trialogue that we have seen during the consultation phase, right, with the expert group, where many very bright minds could be consulted and asked for their opinion. So we would really hope that now the trialogue is not sort of, or the political pressure is not so that at the end of the day, just to get something out there, we are having, the wrong measures or the wrong guardrails in there. So we think it would be really important to also keep some flexibility and make it future-proof. I mean, we have heard it so many times today that the law must be future-proof. And coming to the Brussels effect and whether this is going to be copied around the world, Dragos said it. It's the only piece of legislation right now which is hard law, and that is a huge difference. And that we've also seen with the GDPR, right, which to me still is a fundamentally different piece of legislation because it's much narrower. I mean, it's hugely complicated, but it's much narrower. It covered the single market, and it covered one fundamental right, the right to data protection and privacy. So whether the rest of the world is going to copy the AI Act will, first of all, very much depend on the final outcome. And again, the trialogue is right now really a challenge. And the fact that in all the other systems we see around the globe, they are right now still able to inject more flexibility, right? Which we are not going to have in hard law. Hard law? Hard law. We will see coming back to the GDPR, there is a revision, a review envisaged for 2024. Let's see how that is going to truly take place. But all the voices I've heard on that one is really to say, this is hard law. Are we going to change the material rules of the GDPR? Procedural, maybe, but the material underlying legal text remains to be seen. So, yeah.
Do you see ourselves in 1 year discussing the review of GDPR in a room like this? Or not yet, maybe. Maybe in 2 years.
Not yet, but what do we do with the AI Act then? Are we going
absolutely.
to renegotiate in 1 year's time?
Do you see fundamental inconsistencies between the two at the moment, or not? Between The approach of the AI Act and the GDPR approach.
As I said, I think they're both hard law, but nobody would say that the GDPR was simple or simple to comply with. It's massive, but it's nothing compared to the AI Act. I mean, Jean-Marc was saying that, you know, it covers safety, security aspects. The whole NLF seems to be integrated, and then you add fundamental rights on top. And now we even cover copyright. I mean, that's another battlefield that was injected. Absolutely. So I would argue that the AI Act is yet a totally different level in terms of then afterwards compliance compared to the GDPR.
Do you agree with this, Juha and Dragos? Has it become the mother of our laws, the AI Act? Meaning, we've seen in some of the latest variants, you know, using the term that I use, the very pandemic-related term that I've used before, even the introduction of principles and mechanisms that are very typical of the DSA inside specific provisions, in particular on foundation models. Is it complicating the things too much? What do you think, Juha? Or is it becoming a way, you know, to try and solve too many things at once?
Well, I don't think you would expect me to answer that question. I think it would be inappropriate. But let me just say three things. First of all, I mean, I don't comment on leaks and rumors. Obviously, as a representative of the European Commission, that's not my role. Just on the flexibility and rigidity of it. I should point out, however, that some of the key core aspects are in the annexes, and they can be revised more easily in a simplified procedure, which is not going to take 2.5 years. So that was part of the architecture, which was designed that way in order to be able to respond better to the advances of this technology, which we all know is fast. The other point I would like to make is that it may be the first piece of hard law, but it will not be the only one. There are others in the pipeline. Our friends in Canada are in the process of regulating. They are reasonably advanced. Brazil was mentioned. I understand Korea has also a number of bills being discussed. And in that regard, it will not, in my view, it seems unlikely that it would remain the only piece of hard law on AI going forward.
Thank you very much. Dragos, you want to react to what was said until now? Many things for you. If you don't want, I have a question for you, of course.
No, well, I could react for a week to everything that was said. It's true that it is kind of a mother of all laws when it comes to the fact that we had to look at the GDPR, we had to look at the copyright legislation, we had to look at DSA, and I think we did good by looking at them. Because we've also learned certain things. We've learned certain things from GDPR, what was right and what was less right in the GDPR, and also looking at its implementation. We looked at the DSA and some of the very fresh thinking and solutions that were found there. And I think, again, we did good that we did that. Could we ignore the issue of copyright? Of course we could not. If we were to ignore it, we were to ignore an existential part of what AI is right now and how it is developing into the future. So yes, we were in a situation that is a bit peculiar, where we had, along the way, particularly in Parliament, we had to add things to what the Commission had initially proposed, probably more so than with any other piece of legislation. But such is the state of affairs, and this is what we had to do. So I think that, yes, it added complexity to the text. It is a testimony and a reason why it is now taking maybe longer, as you said at the beginning. But I think we need to take as much time as we need to get it right, because it is so important. Because it is going to be de facto or de jure a model for others. Because it is going to regulate pretty much everything that we are going to do in 5 to 10 years' time from now on. So I'd rather take my time and take our time as a team of negotiators, and as to I open a bracket as to the process itself. It's true that in a trilogue, it does look a bit like a closed conclave. And it's not as transparent, as open, as collaborative as the earlier parts of the process are. This is how it goes in a trilogue. And it's also so delicate, so sensitive, particularly now in the final stages of the negotiations, that we cannot go out to the world and say, listen, let me report on what we've done in the trilogue, because again, you're not doing justice to the team, and also you're not helping the negotiations. So it is, I can understand for certain of the observers, it might be frustrating to not know, to always try to second guess what is going on. But the one thing I can say is that we are trying our best to look at everything that is available out there in terms of thinking, in terms of solutions, to make sure that we do away with some of the risks that also Jean-Marc mentioned. Yes, we are aware that it's not going to be simple to define technical criteria to differentiate between foundation models. We know that. That is why we're now taking so much time to try to figure out exactly how it is, what's the best solution to deal with foundation models. And we haven't yet found the solution. But we're not going to commit pen to paper in writing something that we would believe would not neither be passing the test of time, which is very important, nor that it would do justice to the players out there, developers or deployers, or the ultimate users. And also, rest assured that we are very, very, very attentive also to the issue of competition. We are the last ones that would want to fence the garden and only leave a few to play in that garden. And that is also an important element of the discussions and negotiations that we're doing right now.
Thank you very much, Dragos. I think it's good that these things come out in an open conversation, right?
Absolutely.
Because it does more justice of the intensity of the work that you're doing. And in my opinion, also, I've saw this because I wrote a paper a couple of years ago that looked at the value chain of AI, and this I saw how much, how responsive the members of parliament have been, the rapporteurs, in sort of including that level of additional complexity, unfortunately, in the text, but giving these, including provisions on solidarity along the value chain is a way to preserve competition as well. Anu, you had a comment on this, you signaled, or?
Yes, so very briefly, I think it's just unavoidable that when you're trying to address a multifaceted problem, the law cannot be simple. I'm not prepared to choose either safety or rights. I'm not prepared to say as a producer of copyrighted material that, okay, let's forget copyright. If you look at the US's executive order, it tasks over 25 different agencies. That is the mother of all laws. So in terms of they are really trying to do everything because that is more respectful, more true to what is the problem that we are trying to address. So I think it's just something that it's in many ways it's just honest to recognize the complexity and try to address it with complexity. I think there are still many issues that needs to be resolved. I think your focus on the supply chain issue is really crucial and very hard to get right. I'd be really curious to hear what, in your view, would be the correct risk-based method within the foundation models, as opposed to the tiered model that now has been floated. So I think it's full of still important choices that we need to get right. Couldn't agree more in terms of the importance of getting the enforcement right, because otherwise I think the EU's credibility is at stake, that we have been building just incredible amount of laws that I think all reflect good intentions and are extremely influential, but only if we can really implement them and enforce them effectively.
Thank you very much, Anu. So I don't even need to ask you questions.
Yeah.
I just want to warn the audience that I'm about to open to the floor to questions. So whoever wants to ask a question or a comment, please signal that to see, also for me to understand how many of you. Well, so far I don't see hands raised. So I turn to, there's one over there. Yeah, but I want to just ask the question that Anu just asked you. Vinny, can you give us at least a gist of what you think could be a way to incorporate that specificity in risk assessment? Yeah.
One fundamental, very simple, and I think reasonable ask that we have in this department and for the whole AI Act is give us rules we can actually comply with, which is, I think, reasonable. And that takes us to your point on the value chain. If you're a developer of AI, if you're a deployer, and as you know, there are many other parties in that chain, there are certain things you can do at your level, but then the ball is thrown to someone else, or it was with someone else before. You can't be held responsible for the other players. It's impossible, unless, as you said, Andrea, you have a good contractual relationship or knowledge of all the parties. which you have in the B2B area. And I'm a bit annoyed that we are, with the ChatGPT frenzy, we are trying to regulate the hype at the moment, and we're not seeing behind the ChatGPT tree a forest of other trees, B2B, open source, etc., which have nothing to do with that. And that creates a lot of problems in our value chains. And when I talk about the AI Act to my development teams, my compliance people, very often they're saying, how do we do that? Or isn't GDPR covering that? Isn't the copyright directive already covering that? How do I integrate this into my products? How do I foresee and mitigate risks to the rule of law and the environment as concepts? You know, which might bring us back to the discussion on standards. But you know, there are all kinds of questions here that brings us to very difficult compliance issues, which are all related to where you sit in the value chain.
So I'll turn to Corinna, and then we collect a question. I will add the tweak to this so that you don't have to give an answer to the same exact question, which is, you mentioned, Anu, the executive order in the United States, and it has a peculiarity, which is it takes a very sector-specific view, right? There's the White House mandating behavior and actions in the different federal agencies. Do you think this element will have to be present when the AI Act is translated into concrete compliance behavior? Meaning, is there sufficient guidance in the text of the AI Act, or will it be in implementing acts or in the role of the AI office? Will there have to be something like this for compliance to be surrounded by sufficient legal certainty?
I think it will be massive going forward, and the problem is not to add anything now on top of what we already have, but it's trying to really streamline all the existing legislation we have already and what is in the pipeline. I mean, we have experienced a tsunami of legislation under this commission, which is targeting, you know, many different areas, digital, but also like take medical devices. I wonder how they are going to get their heads around all of that. So I think rather than looking on to add anything on top, the challenge will be really how are all these different pieces of legislation going to work together? Taking again GDPR. GDPR, I have to say, is technology neutral. It's about processing personal data. Might be AI, could be something different. It's personal data. We have never, you know, as a company said, oh, well, we're waiting for the AI Act, you know, and then we look at how, you know, we protect personal data. No, it's already there, and you have to apply it. And for us, it's really then going to be very critical to see how can we be compliant, to see how all these different pieces of legislation are going to work together. And we would very much hope that the next commission is also going to focus on these challenges, because they might even be contradictory. And that is a real challenge to then ensure compliance. And as Jean-Marc said, it does confuse people in the company.
Yeah, and one of the key messages that we got throughout the day is that it's not a question of less or more regulation. It's a matter of the clarity of regulatory obligations. And I think this is in line with, okay, now the hands are multiplying. And we're going to have to be, superhuman here. So I'm going to collect a question over there. Please try to be concise with the questions, but still introduce yourselves when you ask the question. And so I have at least 3 questions here from the floor. Yeah. Go ahead, on the back. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Kevin Zanderman from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. I've got a question for Anu. I mean, I see that the GDPR has been brought up many times, and the last decade has seen a lot of tension on transatlantic data flows between the US and the EU, particularly about the tension between the Cloud Act and GDPR, which now seem to have sort of been resolved with the data privacy framework. Do you see like any potential analogous conflicts emerging in the next decade between the executive order and the EU AI Act?
So I'll collect. There's a question here in the middle, and please bring the microphone here, over there, and then we have one question, Christophe, right? Yeah, okay, on the front. So yes, please.
Hi.
You're there. Okay. There's another one here. Okay, guys, we're going to have to be super quick then.
Sure. This is Gautam. I work for the Center on Regulation in Europe. This has been a fascinating panel because we're working on the same issue, on trying to figure out this question of international governments coming together on AI regulation, specifically on generative AI. The Hiroshima process just concluded. Principle 5 of the Hiroshima process echoes what Jean-Marc just spoke, which was about linking the risk-based approach to foundation models. So I guess my question is to the Commission and to Dragos, what should governments be doing as a next step after this process is complete, and what should they be working on? How should they translate the risk-based approach to rules? And is it, and this is a question for Andrea and the academics on the panel, is there a way to move forward by introducing a principle or concept of AI adequacy, analogous to the data protection world? And maybe that's something that policymakers should work on implementation.
Okay, for this last question, we see if we can open another panel in the agenda of the conference. We had a question here, and then I move to Christophe. So otherwise, Christophe, you take the lead. Meanwhile, someone brings the microphone to the gentleman here.
Yeah, hi.
And then I'm going to give, basically 30 seconds each to answer, because otherwise we...
Sure.
we
for once, my question will not be provocative.
And then we don't want it. No, I'm kidding.
In an age where one question can be generated into whatever the answer you want, it can be text, it can be application, it can be images, it can be any instruction, then isn't this question intellectual property? Now, we just spoke about copyright. Then how do you copyright a prompt?
How do you copyright a prompt? Okay. Did you get the microphone? Okay.
Yep.
Please introduce yourself and...
Henry Parib, the founder of a startup in AI governance. I would like to challenge a little bit the vendors, because they are saying that the politicians should bring, in fact, principles and very clear clarity and a lot of things like that. I must say also that IBM and SAP and all of those vendors have forgot also that they have also to provide some governability inside their own technology. And in fact, it's not just by saying that you should provide clarity on your side, on the political side. And I think that there is also a responsibility of you to provide that sort of capability to provide transparency. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if nobody else had questions. We have to wrap up anyway, so so I'm going to ask our speakers to give really, how do you say? You don't say a tweet anymore. How do you say an X or something? What do you say? A tweet of, as an answer, meaning in terms of length. To echo the questions that have been asked, we go in the same order. Do you have any comment to make?
Well, maybe on the G7. So G7 will continue its work. So that is not concluded. Actually, just we heard Yoichi Ida earlier, and we will. I mean, the task force will convene and then outline the next steps. I mean, we have a very good start, of course, with the Code of Conduct and the guiding principles, but that's one concrete way where we'll be moving forward on an intergovernmental basis.
Thank you. Dragos?
Well, I'll pick up on the very interesting question. Should we copyright a prompt? Should we also copyright a song that is produced by AI? Should we copyright a movie or a video or anything else that is produced by AI? Should we copyright or patent or what produces the soft? But it goes the same thing. If you want to give a Grammy for a very good song that is produced by AI, you give it to whom? To the guy who wrote the prompt or to the guy who wrote the algorithm? So I think the whole issue of intellectual property is challenged by AI, and I think that challenge is going to grow. And not that I want to give tasks to the Commission, but I think inevitably in the next few years we're going to end up with a revision of the current framework. I don't want to look into a crystal ball, but I think it's inevitable because of the challenges that AI is going to pose to creativity, to creation as we know it today.
Thank you very much. Anu? Yeah.
So very briefly, in the US courts, there have been these questions, and thus far the answer has been that we are copyrighting human creations. Very, very briefly on the question, I am afraid we may not have seen the last word on the transatlantic data flows, and there are indications that we will have another court battle, and we will hear how the European Court of Justice ultimately will view the newest privacy framework. I certainly think that we moved a lot, the US has moved much closer to the European view, and the question is whether that is enough. But in many ways, I think we have a new presidential election in the US, which may mean that all bets are off when it comes to future conflicts in the transatlantic setting. I very much worry about the increasing move towards techno-protectionism around the world, including in this city and in the United States, which may then breed more conflicts, and also conflicts around the subsidies and foreign subsidies control. And the US is subsidizing technology very heavily, so is the European Union. There might be some conflicts there. In the AI as such, I would say that if you look at the executive order, the US has moved very closely to how the EU looks at the AI. So I don't see that we are gearing up for a major battle within the AI. And then maybe if I can pick in 10 seconds the other question of whether there ought to be some kind of an adequacy, at least some conversations on mutual recognition as the US is looking to implement the details of the executive order and the Commission is working on standardization. So that certainly would be ideal. I don't think anybody benefits if we are trying to maximize the kind of battle that results in conflicts.
Thank you, marvelous, Jean-Marc, and then Corinna.
So, yeah, thank you. So I'll pick the other question then. I completely agree with you. I never said that the responsibility to be transparent has to be moved in other ways than on the developer. I'm just saying everybody should be transparent. If you look at for my company, IBM, we put out transparency principles, not this year, not 5 years ago. Data belongs to their creator. If you cannot explain how your AI system works, then it shouldn't be on the market. Everybody in the value chain must be held liable for the AI that they put out or that they use. These principles are valid for us, for our clients, for anybody in the value chain, which I think is very open and transparent.
Thank you. Corinna, you get the last.
Thank you very much. So obviously concur with Jean-Marc. I would like to take it, again back to the higher level and the trialogue and the need to keep the risk-based approach. And coming back to the analogy of cars that we had all morning, we were talking about seat belts, but actually when cars were invented, there was a person with a red flag moving in front of the car to signal here is a danger coming. And I believe it's really important that we truly understand, and that was said today as well, where are the dangers, but not slow down this incredible innovation by it constantly moving with the red flag in front of it. So I really hope that this truly stays the seatbelt summit and we can keep the risk-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinna. So from the seatbelt forum, I think this is all. And we go back to AI, give back the floor to Maeve. I want to ask you to give a big applause to our speakers. And we leave the stage now. We leave Maeve from red flags to red
Andrea.
teams.
Leave the stage while the audience is clapping. That's what they say. What a great moderation as well. A round of applause for Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Some serious passion and knowledge behind that moderation. So well done, Andrea. Thank you so much. But it was such a great panel. It actually ate up all our coffee break. But we will give you a quick one if you want to go out, stretch your legs, take your coffee and then come back into the room so we can proceed with the next panel. Because we heard here a mention of Canada. We'll be actually crossing over to Canada to hear what they're up to as well in AI. So please grab a coffee, come back and see you in 5 minutes.